Why did the room go quiet the moment she said, "You're dead already"? No one understood the words at first. They sounded like bravado, a bluff, something said to cover fear. But Sage Hartley didn't raise her voice when she said them. She didn't even look angry. She said it like someone stating the weather. Calm, certain, final. The Navy SEAL sniper across from her smirked, finger still resting near the trigger, the red laser dot dancing just inches from her chest. He'd been trained to read fear. Micro tremors, shallow breathing, widened pupils. He saw none of it. That unsettled him more than any threat ever could. Around them the compound slept in fragments, a flickering generator, distant surf crashing against rocks, the faint smell of diesel and salt. This was supposed to be routine. Intel pickup. Exfil before dawn. Instead, something had gone wrong, very wrong. Sage stood alone in the open courtyard, hands relaxed at her sides, unarmed in the most obvious way. The rest of the team was pinned down 2 levels below, comms half-dead, extraction delayed. The sniper thought he had time, thought he had control. He didn't know what she was counting. Not bullets, not seconds. Breaths. Her own, his. She felt the familiar pressure in her chest, the one that had lived there ever since Yemen, ever since 14 hours alone on a rooftop with her brother bleeding out beside her. Ever since she learned that survival wasn't about being fearless, it was about acting anyway. The sniper shifted his weight, just slightly, a mistake invisible to anyone else. Sage moved. What followed lasted less than 3 seconds. To the man watching through thermal optics 2 rooftops away, it looked impossible. A blur, a miscalculation, a life ended before the brain could register danger. The sniper dropped. No dramatic fall, just a body that stopped obeying commands. Sage caught the rifle before it hit the ground. Only then did she exhale. Later, people would argue about how she did it. Technique, timing, luck. But none of that explained why she'd been there in the first place. Why a woman who had fought so hard to disappear had been pulled back into the light. And why, even now, part of her hated that she hadn't hesitated. Because every time she acted without thinking, she felt like the old version of herself. The one who survived, yes, but at a cost she was still paying. The radio crackled, target down. Sage closed her eyes for half a second, long enough to feel the weight again. Then she answered. Threat neutralized. She didn't add that she'd recognized the man's breathing pattern, that she'd known the shot before he did, that she'd whispered "I'm sorry" without sound. Something stayed inside. By the time extraction finally came, the sun was breaking the horizon, painting the ocean in bruised gold. The journalist was alive, crying, shaking, grateful in a way that hurt to witness. Sage stayed back, wiping blood from her hands that wasn't hers. "You okay?" someone asked. She nodded, because that was easier than explaining the truth, that every mission like this stitched her together and tore her apart at the same time. That night back aboard the carrier, she sat alone on the deck, boots dangling over the edge, waves slapping rhythmically below. The ocean didn't care who you were, what you'd done, who you'd lost. She liked that about it. But peace never lasted. 3 days later, a senior officer stood in front of her with a file she didn't want to see. "You saved a life," he said. She stared at the metal floor. "You ended a threat," he continued. She said nothing. "You also ignored protocol." That made her look up. "Because protocol would have gotten her killed," she said quietly. The officer studied her, not with anger, with something closer to concern. "You're not wrong," he said, "but that's not the question." "What is?" Sage asked. "How long you think you can keep doing this without it costing you more than you're willing to pay?" She didn't have an answer. She never did. All she knew was that somewhere between disappearing and being needed again, she'd lost the ability to tell where one ended and the other began. And the world, it seemed, had decided for her. Because the next mission briefing didn't come with a choice. It came with a name she hadn't heard spoken aloud since Yemen. And the silence that followed was louder than any gunshot she'd ever fired. Why did her hands shake only after the mission was over? No one saw it happen. Not the medics, not the command staff, not the operators who slapped her shoulder and called her solid. Sage waited until she was alone, until the steel door slid shut behind her, until the hum of the ship became background noise. Then she sat on the floor, her back against the wall, knees pulled in, rifle resting beside her like an old friend she no longer trusted. Her hands trembled. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was memory catching up, the delayed cost of control, her body reminding her that it had kept score even when her mind refused to. She pressed her forehead against her knees and breathed until the shaking slowed. She thought of Thomas. She always did after missions like this. The ones where precision mattered more than firepower, where restraint saved lives, where one mistake would have echoed forever. He used to say that the hardest part of being a sniper wasn't pulling the trigger. It was knowing when not to. She wondered what he'd think of tonight. Would he be proud? Or worried? The door chimed softly. Sage, Captain Vance's voice, calm, measured, the voice of someone who didn't knock unless it mattered. Come in, Sage said, forcing steadiness into her tone. Vance stepped inside, eyes scanning automatically. Old habits. She noticed the rifle placement, the angle of Sage's posture, the subtle signs that said she was holding herself together by choice, not comfort. They're debriefing the team, Vance said. You're excused for now. Thank you, Captain. Vance didn't leave. You said something on comms, she continued, right before you moved. Sage swallowed. I don't remember. You said you're dead already. Sage closed her eyes. I didn't mean it like a threat, she said. I meant I'd already seen the outcome. That's what concerns me. Sage looked up. Not because it was wrong, Vance clarified, but because you sounded certain, detached. Detachment keeps you alive. It also isolates you, Vance replied gently. Silence settled between them, not awkward, heavy. You asked once why I told you the truth about your file, Vance said. Why I didn't let you stay invisible forever. Sage nodded. This is why, Vance said. Because when someone carries what you carry, invisibility becomes a slow kind of death. Sage let the words sink in. I don't know how to be anything else, she admitted. You don't have to know yet, Vance said, but you do have to choose whether you keep running. I'm not running, Sage said. Vance raised an eyebrow, not accusing, curious. Then what do you call it, she asked, when someone only feels whole in the moments between shots? Sage had no answer. The captain moved toward the door, then paused. There's another mission coming, she said. High risk, politically sensitive, they asked for you by name. Sage's jaw tightened. I said I'd bring it to you, Vance continued. Not that you'd accept. Who asked? Sage asked quietly. Vance hesitated, just long enough. Someone who read the Yemen report, she said, and understood it. That did it. The room felt smaller. I need time, Sage said. You have 24 hours, Vance replied. After that, they'll find someone else. Sage nodded. After Vance left, Sage picked up the rifle and checked it out of habit. Chamber clear, safety on, controlled movements. She wasn't shaking anymore. That scared her more than the tremors had, because it meant she was already deciding. Why did she accept the mission, even though every instinct told her not to? Sage stood at the edge of the flight deck as dawn broke, wind tearing at her sleeves, rotors warming up nearby. The sea stretched endlessly ahead, indifferent, honest, unforgiving. She spent the night replaying the same argument in her head. You're not ready. They need someone else. You don't get to keep saving people, if you keep breaking yourself. But another voice whispered louder. What if you're the only one who can? She hated that voice. It sounded too much like Thomas. The briefing room was quiet when she walked in. No applause, no ceremony, just professionals who understood what it meant when someone like her took a seat at the table. The target was a mobile command cell, high value, shielded. One clean shot could end a chain of violence before it began. One shot. Sage stared at the satellite image, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. You're in Overwatch, the mission lead said. We'll create the window, you take it if it's there. And if it's not, Sage asked. Then we abort. She nodded. Abort was a word people liked to use. It sounded clean, controlled. It rarely felt that way in reality. As the helicopter lifted off, Sage closed her eyes briefly. Not to pray, to remember who she was choosing to be. Not the ghost, not the weapon, but the person who still believed that restraint mattered. Hours later, lying prone on a ridgeline, rifle steady, breathing slow, she watched the compound come alive through her scope. She saw guards shift, doors open, shadows move. She waited. The window came and went. She didn't fire. The team adjusted. Again the chance appeared, imperfect, risky. She didn't fire. Minutes stretched. Talk to me, the mission lead whispered over comms. I'm waiting, Sage replied. For what? For certainty. Silence. Then movement, the real target exposed, clear, brief. Sage exhaled. This time she fired. The shot was clean, humane, necessary. Afterward, as the team exfiltrated without resistance, Sage felt something unfamiliar. Not pride. Relief. Because for the first time since Yemen, she hadn't acted out of reflex or guilt or obligation. She acted out of choice. Why did coming home feel harder than the mission itself? The base welcomed her back with efficiency, not celebration. That suited Sage fine. She didn't want congratulations. She wanted quiet. But quiet had a way of amplifying things. She passed the cafeteria on her way to quarters. The smell of coffee, the clatter of trays, ordinary life continuing without knowing how close it had come to breaking. A young recruit dropped a plate, flinched, apologized too fast. Sage paused. It's okay, she said gently, helping him pick it up. Happens. The recruit looked surprised, then grateful. It was a small thing, almost nothing. But it stayed with her. Later that night, she stood by the water again, watching waves fold into themselves. She thought of all the moments she'd been unseen, and all the moments she'd been forced into view. Maybe the answer wasn't choosing one or the other. Maybe it was learning how to stand without needing either. Captain Vance joined her quietly. They're offering you the instructor role again, she said, with conditions, flexibility, space. Sage considered it. I'm not fixed, she said. Vance smiled faintly. None of us are. After a long pause, Sage nodded. I'll try, she said. That was all she could promise. Why did the trainees listen to her, even when she barely spoke? Sage didn't lecture, didn't posture, she corrected grips, adjusted stances, asked questions instead of giving answers. When someone failed, she didn't shame them. She waited. She knew what pressure did to people, how it revealed cracks, how it could either destroy or refine. One trainee asked her once how she stayed calm. Sage thought for a moment. I don't, she said. I just don't let panic make decisions for me. That became her quiet philosophy. Weeks passed. The base changed in subtle ways. Fewer jokes at someone else's expense. More eyes lifted when support staff walked by. Small shifts, real ones. Sage noticed. She didn't comment. She didn't need to. Why did the world finally feel quiet when she stopped trying to be invisible? On the anniversary of Yemen, Sage visited the shore alone. No rifle, no uniform, just the sound of waves and the memory of a brother who had taught her how to breathe through chaos. "I'm still here," she whispered to the wind. "I'm trying." She felt no answer, and didn't need one. Some wounds didn't close. They became part of you, not as weaknesses but as reminders. She turned back toward the lights of the base, toward people learning, toward a future that didn't ask her to disappear or perform, only to show up honestly. And maybe that was enough. Because sometimes strength doesn't announce itself. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did her hands start shaking only after the helicopter lifted away? No one noticed it at first. Not the medic who checked her pupils. Not the team lead who clapped her shoulder and called the shot clean. Not the journalist wrapped in a thermal blanket, whispering thank you to anyone who would listen. Sage Hartley kept her face still, her posture steady, her breathing measured. She had learned long ago that the body could lie if the will was strong enough. It was only once the rotors faded into distance, once the compound disappeared beneath the dark curve of the earth, that the tremor crept in. Her fingers twitched against her thigh just once, then again. She curled them into a fist and forced the movement to stop. This always came later, the delay, the part nobody trained you for. In the moment there was clarity, purpose, a narrowing of the world until it fit neatly inside a scope. Afterward, the world rushed back in all at once, loud and heavy and unforgiving. She sat on the cold metal bench inside the aircraft, helmet resting beside her, eyes fixed on nothing. Around her, the others spoke in low voices, replaying angles and timings, already turning the mission into a story they could carry without it cutting too deep. Sage didn't join in. She never did. She could still feel the trigger break beneath her finger. Not the recoil, not the sound. The decision. That was what stayed with her. When they landed aboard the carrier, she moved with the group, boots striking steel in time with everyone else. Debrief, signatures, a nod from an officer who hadn't been there but would take credit for having sent the right people. Routine, efficient, clean. Too clean. Sage excused herself as soon as protocol allowed and walked the long corridor toward her quarters. The lights hummed overhead. The walls smelled faintly of oil and salt. Familiar, safe. She unlocked the door, stepped inside and closed it behind her. Only then did she let her back slide down the wall until she was sitting on the floor. Her breath came faster now, not panicked, just uncontained. She rested her forearms on her knees and stared at the opposite wall. Her hands were shaking again, more visibly this time. She didn't try to stop it. 14 months ago, she would have hated this moment. The weakness of it. The reminder that no matter how precise she was, no matter how disciplined, her body still remembered what her mind tried to bury. Now she simply acknowledged it. "Easy," she whispered to herself, the way her brother used to when her breathing got shallow on Overwatch. "You're safe." The words felt strange, unconvincing, but she said them anyway. She thought of the sniper she'd faced. The way his confidence had been built on the assumption that fear always announced itself. That dominance came from volume, from posture, from the threat of violence made visible. He'd never seen her coming. That scared her more than anything. Because it meant that part of her, the part that moved without hesitation, was still intact, still sharp, still dangerous. She pushed herself to her feet and stripped off her gear piece by piece, placing everything in its proper place. Order mattered. It gave her hands something to do. When she reached the rifle, she paused. Her fingers traced the familiar contours, the places worn smooth by years of repetition. This weapon had ended lives. It had also saved them. It was neither good nor evil, just honest. She set it down gently and stepped into the small sink area, splashing cold water on her face. When she looked up, her reflection startled her, not because it was unfamiliar, but because it was. Same eyes, Same controlled expression. Same woman who had knelt on a rooftop in Yemen and decided to stay. "I didn't run," she said to the empty room. The silence didn't argue. A soft chime at the door broke the moment. "Sage," Captain Vance's voice calm and unmistakable. "May I come in?" Sage straightened, rolling her shoulders once, and opened the door. Vance stood there without ceremony, her gaze taking in the details automatically. The placement of gear, the stillness in Sage's posture, the faint tension she wasn't trying very hard to hide. "They're starting the formal debrief," Vance said. "I told them you join later." "Thank you, Captain." Vance nodded, then didn't leave. "You said something on comms," she said instead. Sage felt her jaw tighten. "Did I?" "Right before the engagement," Vance continued. "You said you're dead already." Sage looked away. "I didn't mean it like that." "I know," Vance said quietly. "That's what concerns me." Sage met her eyes. "Because I was right." "Because you were certain." The word landed heavier than accusation. "In this line of work," Sage said, "hesitation kills." "So does certainty," Vance replied, just more slowly. They stood in silence for a moment, two women shaped by the same machine in different eras, both carrying losses they never spoke about unless necessary. "You moved without waiting for confirmation," Vance said. "You altered the plan." "The plan was wrong," Sage said evenly. "The window was collapsing." "And you trusted your judgment over everyone else." "Yes." Vance studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "That's why it worked." Sage blinked, surprised. "And that's why I worry," Vance added. "Because judgment like that comes from somewhere, and wherever it comes from, it's not a place you can visit endlessly without paying a price." Sage looked down at her hands. They were still now. "I don't feel reckless," she said. "No," Vance agreed. "You feel tired." That one slipped past her defenses. "I'm fine," Sage said automatically. Vance didn't challenge it. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You don't have to decide anything tonight, but there's another request coming, higher up. They asked for you specifically." Sage felt a familiar tightening in her chest. "I thought this was supposed to be a quiet assignment." "It was," Vance said, "until it was." "Why me?" Vance hesitated just briefly. "Because someone read the after-action report from Yemen, the full one." The room felt colder. "Most people see numbers," Vance continued. "Distances, time on target. They don't see what it costs to stay when leaving would be easier." Sage swallowed. "I stayed because I had to." "You stayed because you could," Vance corrected. "There's a difference." She turned toward the door. "Get some rest. You have 24 hours before the request becomes an order." After she left, Sage sat back down on the edge of her bunk. 24 hours. She stared at the wall again, but this time the memories didn't rush in all at once. They came slowly, manageable. Her brother's voice, not screaming, just steady. The weight of the rifle. The long hours of stillness broken only by breathing and wind. She lay back and closed her eyes. For the first time in a long while, sleep came without resistance. Not because the ghosts were gone, but because, for once, she wasn't running from them. And somewhere in the quiet, she realized the most unsettling truth of all. A part of her hadn't just survived tonight. It had remembered who it was. Why did she say yes, even though every instinct told her to walk away? Sage stood on the flight deck before dawn, the sky still bruised purple, the horizon barely breathing light. The carrier vibrated beneath her boots, alive with quiet urgency. Somewhere behind her, a helicopter was warming up, rotors beginning their slow, deliberate spin. The sound crept into her chest and settled there, familiar as a second heartbeat. She hadn't slept much, not because of nightmares. Those had learned to keep their distance. It was the waiting that kept her awake, the kind that pressed questions into the dark and refused to let them go unanswered. 24 hours. That was what Captain Vance had given her. Time enough to refuse, time enough to disappear again, time enough to choose a version of herself that didn't keep stepping closer to the edge. She leaned her forearms against the railing and looked out at the water. The ocean didn't care what she decided. It would keep moving either way. "You don't owe them anything," a quiet voice inside her said. Another voice answered, sharper, "But what if they need you?" She closed her eyes. This was how it always started, not with orders, not with urgency, with a question that sounded like responsibility and felt like guilt. The briefing room filled slowly. Operators took their seats without chatter, expressions neutral, bodies already shifting into mission mode. Sage slipped into an empty chair near the back. No one commented. A few glanced her way, curiosity flickering and then fading. She was just another name on the roster, for now. The lights dimmed. A satellite image bloomed onto the screen, grainy, distant, deceptively calm. "This is a mobile command node," the mission lead said. "It's been relocating every 48 hours. We have a narrow window." Sage studied the image, her eyes tracing access points, blind spots, the subtle signs of human presence. She felt the familiar narrowing begin, the world sharpening. "We believe the target will appear here," the lead continued, highlighting a balcony overlooking an interior courtyard. "Visibility is limited, crowd density high." "Collateral risk?" someone asked. "Unavoidable," the lead replied, "but minimized." Sage felt her jaw tighten. "Overwatch?" another operator asked. The lead hesitated, then looked directly at her. "Hartley." The room shifted, not dramatically, just enough. "You'll be positioned here," the lead said, marking a ridgeline nearly a kilometer out. "You take the shot only if the window is clean." "And if it's not?" Sage asked. "Then we abort." "Abort." The word landed with hollow confidence. Abort meant restraint. Abort meant safety. Abort meant someone else might die later, somewhere less visible, where it wouldn't trouble the conscience as much. Sage nodded once, understood. As the briefing ended, she stayed seated while others filtered out. She watched their backs, the way they carried themselves, focused, ready, unaware of the argument still unfolding inside her. She wasn't afraid of the shot. She was afraid of what waiting might cost. The helicopter ride out was rough. Wind buffeted the frame, vibrations rattling through her bones. Sage sat opposite the door, helmet secured, hands resting loosely on her thighs. Across from her, a young operator checked his gear with exaggerated thoroughness. "First time running Overwatch with you," he said, attempting casual. She met his eyes. "You'll do fine." He nodded, visibly relieved by the simplicity of the exchange. They touched down miles from the target. The team moved fast, practiced, disappearing into terrain that offered little cover and no forgiveness. Sage climbed to her position alone, the rifle's weight familiar, grounding. By the time she settled prone on the ridgeline, the sun was high enough to burn away the morning haze. Heat shimmered in the distance. She adjusted her scope, dialed in windage, slowed her breathing. The compound came into focus. She watched. Minutes passed, then more. Movement flickered at the edges of the frame. Guards rotated. Civilians drifted in and out, unaware of how close they were to a moment that could redefine their day or end it. "Status," the mission lead whispered over comms. "I have eyes," Sage replied. "No shot." "Copy." She waited. Her mind wandered despite her discipline, not to fear, to memory. Thomas lying beside her, blood soaking into concrete, whispering instructions between shallow breaths. "Don't rush it. Let it come to you." The first window appeared abruptly. The target stepped into view, partially obscured, surrounded by others. The shot was possible, risky. It would have been easy to justify. Sage didn't fire. Her finger rested outside the trigger guard. Her breathing remained steady. The window closed. "Why didn't you take it?" someone whispered, barely masking tension. "Not clean," Sage said. Silence followed, then acceptance. Time stretched. The sun climbed higher. Sweat traced slow paths down her spine. Muscles began to ache from stillness. She welcomed the discomfort. It kept her present. The second window came. Better, clearer, still not right. Again, she didn't fire. This time, the silence on comms was heavier. "Sage," the mission lead said carefully, "talk to me." "I'm waiting," she replied. "For what?" "For certainty." There it was, the truth she rarely voiced. Certainty wasn't arrogance. It wasn't obsession. It was the absence of doubt so complete that it left no room for regret. She had learned the difference the hard way. The third window arrived without warning. The target stepped into open space, alone for a fraction of a second, posture relaxed, unaware. The background was clear, the angle perfect, the wind steady. Sage exhaled. She didn't think of Thomas. She didn't think of Yemen. She didn't think of the people watching. She thought only of responsibility. Her finger moved. The rifle spoke once. The target fell out of frame, not dramatically, just suddenly absent. No chaos followed, no alarms, just confusion that bloomed too late. "Impact," Sage said softly. "Confirmed," came the reply moments later. "Exfil." As the team withdrew, Sage remained in position until the last possible moment, watching the compound absorb what had happened. Lives would ripple outward from this point, altered in ways no report would ever capture. When she finally rose, her legs protested, pins and needles biting sharply. She welcomed the sensation. It reminded her she was still in her body. On the ride back, no one spoke to her, not out of fear, out of respect. She stared out the open door at the passing landscape, feeling something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not triumph. Relief. Because she hadn't fired out of reflex, or obligation, or the need to prove anything. She had waited. She had chosen. And for the first time in a long while, that choice felt like it belonged to her. Why did coming back feel harder than the moment she pulled the trigger? The helicopter touched down with a jolt that ran up Sage's legs and into her spine. Metal screamed against metal, rotors screaming louder, wind tearing at loose straps and open collars. It should have felt like release, the end of tension, the closing of a loop. Instead, her chest tightened, as if something inside her had been left behind on that ridgeline. She stepped onto the deck and moved with the others, boots striking in rhythm, posture neutral, eyes forward. The carrier swallowed them whole, all gray corridors and recycled air. The mission dissolved quickly into procedure. Weapons cleared, gear logged, names checked off a list. "Clean work," someone muttered as they passed her. Sage nodded once. Inside, something twisted. Clean was a word people used when they didn't want to say final. The debrief was brief. Numbers, timings, confirmations. The kind of language that made events manageable, portable, something you could file away and never visit again. Sage answered when spoken to, her voice steady, her face unreadable. No one pushed. They never did. When she was dismissed, she didn't go to her quarters. She walked past them, then past the mess, then out onto the open deck. The sea hit her like a living thing. Wind carried salt and cold, cutting through the thin layer of sweat still clinging to her skin. Waves folded and unfolded endlessly below, indifferent to the lives measured out above them. Sage gripped the railing and leaned forward slightly, breathing in until her lungs burned. This was the part no one prepared you for. The after. She wasn't replaying the shot. That would have been easier to justify, easier to compartmentalize. What haunted her instead was the waiting before it, the two windows she'd let pass. What if she'd been wrong? What if waiting had cost someone else their life somewhere down the line? Certainty had felt real in the moment. Now it felt fragile. You look like you're arguing with the ocean. The voice came from behind her, familiar enough that she didn't startle. Captain Vance stepped up beside her, hands tucked into her jacket pockets, gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's not listening," Sage said. Vance smiled faintly. "It never does." They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't demand filling. "You could have taken the first shot," Vance said eventually. "I know. Some would have. I know. And you didn't." Sage swallowed. "I wasn't sure." "That's not what the report says." Sage turned to her. "Reports don't feel what we feel." Vance glanced at her, then really looked. "No," she said, "they don't." The wind tugged at Sage's hair, pulling loose strands free. She didn't bother fixing them. "I thought certainty would feel solid," she said quietly, "like something you could stand on." "And it does." "It does," Sage replied, "until it's over." Vance nodded. "That's the part people don't talk about. Decisions don't end when the action does. They echo." Sage closed her eyes briefly. "I don't regret it." "That's good," Vance said, "but you're not relieved either." "No. That's honest." They turned back toward the water. A distant aircraft rose into the sky, its silhouette shrinking until it became just another moving dot. "You're staying," Vance said. It wasn't a question. Sage hesitated. "I think so." "Because they need you." "Because I do," Sage said, surprising herself. Vance studied her for a moment, then nodded. "That's the right reason." Later that night, Sage walked through the barracks slowly, passing open doors and half-heard conversations. Laughter here, music there, life continuing in fragments. She felt separate from it but not excluded, like someone standing just outside a circle of light, able to step in if she chose. In her quarters, she sat on the bunk and unlaced her boots with deliberate care. Her muscles ached now, the delayed protest of hours spent still. She welcomed the sensation. Pain was simple, honest. She lay back and stared at the ceiling. Her mind drifted, uninvited, to Yemen. Not the firefight, not the chaos. The quiet afterward. Thomas had been barely conscious, eyes half-lidded, voice reduced to a rasp. She wanted to talk to him, to say something meaningful, something that mattered. All she'd managed was, "I'm here." He'd smiled just barely. "I know," he'd whispered. The memory hit her chest like a weight. Tears welled before she could stop them. Not sobs, just a few that slipped free and traced slow lines into her hair. She didn't wipe them away. She let them exist. That was new. In the days that followed, the base settled back into its rhythms. Training runs, maintenance checks, quiet briefings that didn't include her name. Sage moved through it all with a strange sense of distance, as if she were observing herself from just outside her body. People treated her differently now. Not dramatically. No reverence. Just a subtle shift, conversations pausing when she entered, eyes flicking toward her for confirmation before decisions were made. She hadn't asked for that weight. She carried it anyway. One afternoon, she passed the range and paused at the sound of uneven shots. A group of trainees struggled with basic grouping, frustration evident even from a distance. An instructor barked corrections that didn't seem to land. Without thinking, Sage stepped inside. She didn't take the instructor's place. She stood beside one of the trainees, a young woman whose hands trembled as she tried to steady her aim. "Breathe," Sage said softly, "not deeper, slower." The trainee glanced at her, startled, then nodded. Sage adjusted her stance just a fraction, lowered her shoulders, touched nothing else. "Don't chase the target," Sage continued. "Let it come to you." The next shot landed closer. Then closer still. The instructor watched, silent. When the session ended, the trainee looked at Sage with something like awe. "Thank you, ma'am." Sage shook her head. "You did the work." As she walked away, something shifted inside her. Small, almost imperceptible. She realized the mission hadn't just taken something from her. It had given her a question she couldn't ignore anymore. What if survival wasn't about staying sharp? What if it was about staying present? That night, standing on the deck again, Sage looked out at the water and felt, for the first time since she'd returned, a faint sense of balance. Not peace, but the possibility of it. And for now, that was enough. Why did the quiet suddenly feel heavier than any battlefield she'd ever known? Sage noticed it during the early hours when the base moved in half light and half silence. No alarms, no urgency, just routine unfolding the way it always did. Boots on concrete, doors opening and closing, the distant thump of training fire echoing from the range. This was supposed to be the easy part, the safe part. And yet, it pressed on her chest harder than the moment she'd waited for the shot. She walked the perimeter trail alone, breath visible in the cool morning air. The path hugged the edge of the base, just close enough to the sea that the wind carried salt and damp into her lungs. She started walking out of habit, then kept going because stopping felt worse. On missions, every second had weight, purpose. Here time felt loose, unanchored. Her comm buzzed softly, not a call, a message request. Captain Vance. Sage stopped, looking out over the water before accepting. Walk with me, Vance said, when you're ready. Sage turned back toward the inner paths. They met near the old training grounds, where weathered obstacles stood like relics from earlier versions of the same war. Vance didn't waste time with pleasantries. She rarely did. You've been helping at the range, Vance said. Sage shrugged. They needed it. They didn't ask. They didn't have to. Vance studied her, eyes sharp but not unkind. You're shifting, she said. Do you feel it? Sage considered the question. I feel exposed. That's usually what growth feels like. I don't know if I want growth, Sage admitted. I know what that costs. Vance nodded. So do I. They started walking together, their pace unhurried. People think strength looks like control, Vance said. Like certainty, like never letting anyone see you bend. And you do, Sage asked. I think strength looks like knowing when to stop pretending you're unaffected. The words settled slowly. I don't know how to be anything but useful, Sage said. When there's no mission, no target, I don't know where to put myself. That's not unusual, Vance replied. You've been defined by function for a long time. And if I stop, then you get to decide who you are without it. The idea felt dangerous, more dangerous than any ridgeline. Later that day, Sage sat in on a trainee debrief at the instructor's request. She stayed in the back, arms crossed, saying little. The trainees spoke about mistakes, about freezing, about second-guessing themselves under pressure. One of them, a young man with tired eyes, hesitated before speaking. I keep thinking I should have done better, he said, like there's no excuse. Sage spoke before she meant to. There's always an excuse, she said quietly. It's called being human. The question is whether you learn from it or let it define you. The room went still. The trainee nodded slowly, relief visible in his shoulders. Afterward, the instructor approached her. You have a way of saying things people hear. Sage didn't know how to respond to that. That evening, she found herself in the armory, checking weapons she didn't need to check. Old habits seeking comfort. She moved automatically, efficiently, until she realized what she was doing. She stopped. The stillness rushed in. Her hands rested on the workbench, fingers splayed. She felt the faint tremor return, not fear, not adrenaline, uncertainty. She thought of Thomas again, not dying this time, laughing, teasing her for taking everything so seriously, telling her that life didn't always need a reason to be lived. You're still here, she whispered. The words felt less like reassurance and more like responsibility. That night she dreamed without violence. No scopes, no gunfire, just walking through a wide, empty place with no destination and no urgency. She woke unsettled but curious. In the days that followed, the base adjusted around her presence. People sought her out not for orders but for perspective. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, it was careful, honest. She noticed something else too. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was listening. One afternoon, she received a message from higher command, an offer, a formal transition, instructor, mentor, a role that would keep her close to the edge without pushing her over it. She stared at the screen for a long time. Accepting felt like admitting she couldn't do what she once had. Refusing felt like running. She walked back to the deck and watched the ocean again, always moving, never the same, still itself. She thought about waiting for certainty. Then she thought about something else. Maybe certainty wasn't the goal anymore. Maybe presence was. When she finally responded, her reply was brief. "I'll take it," she wrote, "on one condition." The reply came quickly, "Name it." "I stay honest," Sage typed, "even when it's uncomfortable." There was a pause. Then agreed. Sage lowered the device and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. For the first time in a long while, the quiet didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like space. And space, she was learning, was where healing had room to begin. Why did the world finally feel quiet the moment she stopped trying to disappear? Sage stood alone at the edge of the base as dawn softened the horizon, the sky thinning from charcoal to pale blue. The air was cold enough to sting, sharp enough to keep her awake. She hadn't come here for ceremony. She hadn't told anyone she was leaving the barracks early. Some moments didn't need witnesses. The ocean breathed steadily below, patient and vast. Today marked a year since Yemen. She hadn't planned to remember it. The body did that on its own. Dates lodged themselves in muscle and bone, surfaced without invitation. She learned not to fight it. Resistance only sharpened the edges. She sat on a low concrete barrier and let her boots rest against the stone, hands folded loosely in her lap. No rifle, no radio, just the quiet and the memory of a brother who had once told her that silence wasn't empty, it was where truth waited. "I'm still here," she said aloud, her voice nearly lost to the wind. "I'm trying to do this right." There was no answer, and for the first time she didn't need one. Later that morning, the trainees gathered on the range, not because it was scheduled, because word traveled faster than orders. They stood in loose formation, some familiar faces, some new. Nervous energy buzzed, not fear, anticipation. Sage arrived without announcement. She didn't stand in front of them, she stood among them. "We're not here to make you fearless," she said, her voice calm, unforced. "Fear is honest. It tells you what matters." A few heads lifted, attention sharpened. "We're here to teach you how to act anyway," she continued. "Not fast, not loud, right." She paired them off, watched their stances, corrected gently. When someone missed a shot, she didn't raise her voice. "What did you feel just before you pulled the trigger?" she asked one trainee. The young woman hesitated. "Rushed," she admitted. Sage nodded, then slowed down. Precision doesn't come from pressure, it comes from patience. As the morning unfolded, Sage felt something settle into place. Not ease exactly, but alignment. The kind that came when you stopped fighting who you were becoming. During a break, Captain Vance watched from a distance. She didn't interrupt. She rarely did when she saw something working. "You've changed the tone," Vance said later when the range had cleared. "I didn't mean to," Sage replied. "Intent doesn't always matter," Vance said. "Impact does." Sage considered that. That afternoon, paperwork waited. Signatures, transitions made official. A new role defined but flexible. She read every line not out of distrust but respect for herself and for what she was agreeing to carry. At the bottom, she paused. Once this is signed, Vance said, there's no going back to how it was. Sage picked up the pen. I know. And you're ready. Sage thought of the ridgeline, the waiting, the moment she'd chosen certainty, not the kind that rushed, but the kind that listened. I'm ready to be present, she said. That's enough. She signed. That evening, the base marked the end of the week the way it always did, with laughter in pockets, music spilling from open doors, life asserting itself wherever it could. Sage walked through it slowly, not observing from the edges this time, but moving within it. A trainee waved, another nodded, someone asked her opinion and waited for the answer. She gave it honestly. When the sun dipped low, she returned to the deck one last time. The ocean caught the light and fractured it into gold. She rested her hands on the railing, feeling the vibration of the ship beneath her palms. She thought of all the times she'd tried to make herself smaller, quieter, easier to overlook, as if invisibility could protect her from loss. It hadn't. What had protected her, what was protecting her now, was choice. Conscious, imperfect, human choice. Captain Vance joined her, unannounced as always. You know, Vance said, people are going to tell your story. Sage smiled faintly. They already do. They'll focus on the shot, Vance continued. The words you said, the moment you moved. And miss the waiting, Sage said. Vance nodded. They always do. Sage watched the water. That's okay. Is it? Yes, she said, because the waiting wasn't for them, it was for me. They stood together as the light faded. Later, alone in her quarters, Sage unpacked a small box she'd carried with her for years without opening. Inside lay Thomas's watch, scratched and stopped at the hour everything had changed. She held it in her palm, feeling its weight. I didn't fix it, she said softly, but I didn't break either. She set the watch on the shelf where she could see it, not as a wound but as a marker, a reminder of where she'd been and why she chose to stay. That night sleep came gently. No dreams of gunfire, no echoes of shouted commands. Just darkness and rest. In the weeks that followed, Sage found her rhythm, teaching, listening, stepping in when needed, stepping back when not. She learned that leadership didn't require dominance, only clarity. When missions came and went, she felt the pull but not the ache. She understood now that purpose didn't vanish when you stopped pulling the trigger. It transformed. One afternoon, a trainee asked her the question she'd once avoided. How do you know when you're ready? Sage thought for a long moment. You don't, she said finally. You just know when you're honest. The trainee nodded, absorbing the answer. As the sun set that day, Sage returned to the deck. Same place, same sea, different woman. She stood taller, not because she needed to be seen, but because she no longer needed to hide. And in that quiet, she understood something that had taken her years to learn. Strength wasn't the absence of fear. It wasn't certainty that rushed ahead of doubt. It wasn't silence born of pain. Strength was choosing to act with dignity, even when no one was watching. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.